Hey everyone, Chad or Patriot Astro here. I've been trying to complete a couple videos for a while now, but the clouds have been uncooperative at best. As a result, I can't complete those just yet. But rather than keep you waiting for a video release, I decided to shift gears a bit and take a look at my own remote imaging computers. Now these are the ones that run my session and operate my equipment, not the ones I use for image processing and editing. This video you're watching right now is the first in a short series. Today we'll cover remote imaging computer hardware and more specifically performance considerations and performance improvements. I did some testing and got results that I think you'll find interesting, especially if you want to speed up your own system. The next video I put out in this series will take you through upgrading your own mini PC through the addition of an NVMe drive. After that, another video in the series will cover how I set up my own imaging rig PCs. I'll cover the entire process, the end-to-end build and configuration of an imaging computer, including configuration of the Windows operating system through loading drivers, software, and even getting Nina and SharpCap communicating with your hardware. My goal with that video will be to get you to a fully functional system capable of connecting to your hardware, plate solving, guiding, focusing, and taking images. My process and tips should make it easier for you to complete your own build without ripping too much of your hair out along the way. Whether you're in the market for a mini PC to remotely operate your telescope, already have one and are looking for an upgrade, or just want something lighter weight that consumes less power in the field, I hope to provide you with some helpful info. While everything I do in these videos will work on Windows 10, I'm personally moving to Windows 11, so that'll be covered as well. If you like what you see in this video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, watch some of my other videos, and share them with anyone you think could benefit. As always, anything I talk about will be linked in the video description, and everything I discuss here is something I myself am using. The links are mostly affiliate links, and I do get some small compensation if you make a purchase after clicking. Please consider using one of these links on the way to your purchase. But as always, if you find it somewhere cheaper, go for it, no problem. All right, are you ready? Let's go. We're going to start today's discussion with a little bit of information about hardware components in your typical mini PC. I'll be mentioning one specific vendor quite a bit since they're whose equipment I'm using lately. For better or worse, I'll pronounce this as MeLE. I apologize now if I'm saying it wrong. I've used their mini-PC stick computers multiple times over the years, as well as their Quieter 2 and Quieter 3 systems. If you're using something from B-Link or King Dell or anything else in the mini-PC or fanless PC realm, you'll benefit from today's discussion as well. Using something bigger than this, and you'll still likely learn something too. If you feel like some of this is knowledge you already have, feel free to use the YouTube chapters feature to skip ahead in the video to the testing, data, and findings. Everyone else, stick with me so you can learn a thing or two about this hardware before we get into the results and recommendations. When you're in the market for a mini PC to remotely control your imaging rig, you should be looking for a couple things. You probably start by looking at the processor, memory, and storage, like everyone else. Since portable small form factor systems are pre-built with onboard soldered components, you need to find a system that has a mix of what you're looking for right out of the gate. There are other things you should be looking for as well. Certainly consider the ports that are available and connectivity it provides. Does it have Ethernet and Wi-Fi for network access? How many USB 3 ports does it have? I'll assume it has HDMI for a monitor so you can configure it initially throughout the first part of the setup. Does it support any type of expansion or upgrades? Maybe storage? You should also consider the size and weight of the unit, especially in cases where you plan to mount it directly to the scope itself or carry it out into the wilderness campsite. Also think about power requirements if you plan on running off a battery. Something low power that runs natively on 12-volt DC would be ideal. In our case, since we likely want low power consumption and a small form factor, we'll be buying a system with components designed primarily for mobile use, which means lower performance and slower than what you would typically get in a full desktop system. Okay, I've come to terms with that, but how do I make sure I still get something that'll meet my needs and perform within reason? Well, that's hopefully why you're here today. Let's step through some of the hardware components quickly. First, processors. They can be put into two major categories for our discussion here today: desktop and portable or mobile. For desktop, think Intel i5, i7, or i9 desktop processors. They have more power, cores, speeds, cache, and a number of other factors. But they're also more expensive. They're bigger and consume more power. For portable or mobile processing, think J and N series Intel processors. The pros and cons here for portable processors, just flip them around. Remember, for our type of mini system that you're going to be looking at, you're going to be dealing with portable processors in most cases, so just come to terms with that now. There are some smaller systems with i5 and i7 processors. They're not as small as the ones with mobile components, and your price will minimally double, plus the power consumption will certainly be higher. Most of the mini PCs I'm seeing today that'll fit our needs are using Intel's J4125 or N5105 processors. I'd recommend going with the N5105 out of the two for several reasons. Many people get hung up purely on processor clock speed. Don't fall into that trap. The mobile processor you choose will also dictate so many other capabilities built into the system, from what type of memory will be used and even the bus speeds to all peripherals, including our storage system. As an example, both of these processors have base clock speeds of 2 GHz, but the N5105 uses memory that's 20% faster and PCIe communication lanes that are about 100% faster. Newer processors mean everything else improves too. Next, memory. And here we have desktop and portable options again. For desktop systems, think about something like DDR4 memory, which has a 64-bit communication channel. Desktop memory is typically expandable and uses faster bus and communication channels overall. Of course, they're bigger and use more power than our portable counterparts. Now, portable or mobile memory options include LPDDR4 and the newer LPDDR4X memory. Both are low-power DDR, but LPDDR4X uses half the power of its predecessor and gives us a faster memory clock speed as well. Both of these low-power options are smaller, but not expandable since they're soldered to the motherboard. Now storage, and this is the most exciting part of the conversation because it's where we have choices and can improve our system. With storage, we have to consider size or footprint, power consumption, storage capacity, seek times, and read-write access speeds. Don't forget the bus speed though. Just because the storage you're using may be fast, you have to consider how you're going to get the data to and from it. Is it USB 2 or 3? Is it SATA? Or does it use PCIe lanes? And if it does, what version and how many? I'll rule out the older mechanical hard drives right away. They're slow and bulky and not found in our typical Astro computing models. More common storage today for us will be eMMC, Flash, micro SD, and SD via NVMe. eMMC is embedded multimedia card storage. It's a type of NAND or flash storage. Just so you know, NAND is flash, like your thumb drives and most external storage options. And eMMC is almost the same thing, but is soldered to the motherboard. eMMC theoretical speeds tend to be close to what SATA SSD gives us, which are theoretically about 500 megabytes per second. You'll see later that you shouldn't expect that speed, ever. Since we mentioned it, flash storage, or NAND, since connected via USB in most cases, will be limited by USB speeds. Now be careful here. Marketing plays some tricks on you. Published USB speeds are in Gbps. Notice that little B? That's where they get you. See, B is bit and B is byte. That's a difference by a factor of 8. The published transfer rate of USB 3.0 is 5 Gbps, which is actually 625 megabytes per second. You will not get 5 gigabytes per second. Oh, and not all flash is created equal. You know when you go to the store to buy a thumb drive, and on the wall there are like 10 options that all say 512 gigabytes, but range from price anywhere from 15 to 80 US dollars? There's a reason. Connecting to a USB 3.0 bus with a cheap USB 3.0 stick could give you a transfer rate of just 1 megabyte per second. Don't believe me? Try it yourself. I'll tell you about a tool you can use later on when we get to some of the performance testing. Next, lots of mini computers also come with micro SD slots. They suck. Almost 100% of the time, they use a cheap controller for connectivity. There are so many reasons to avoid this type of storage on mini PCs, so please just don't use it unless you absolutely need to transfer a file. Now on to the more exciting storage options. SSD and NVMe terminology is used somewhat interchangeably, but they really shouldn't be. You may see a drive labeled this way. M2 is the physical connector type on the motherboard. 2280 is the form factor. It actually tells you it's 22 millimeters wide and 80 millimeters long. NVMe is the communication protocol used by the stick to read and write from the chip. And SSD is the type of storage. Read your computer specs and know what you need. If using the Quieter 2 or Quieter 3 systems like me, and you don't want to sort all this out for yourself, you can always just go into the product links that I've put in the description. So that's the hardware overview, but what did I end up testing? Mostly drive speeds, but I also did a little bit of frames per second testing. I worked with what I personally use, but the findings and methodology here should apply to any system. I tested with the Quieter 2 on Windows 10, the Quieter 2 after upgrading it to Windows 11, a miniPC stick on Windows 10, and also the Quieter 3 on Windows 11. I'm not a MeLE spokesperson here, it's just what I happen to be using. If your B-Link or whatever else you're using has similar specs, you can likely expect similar outcomes. For the drives, I tested what was available in the system and what I had available to attach and upgrade. I tested the onboard eMMC drive, I added an internal NVMe where I could. I also tested a micro SD card and multiple types of USB attached storage. How about the testing methodology? Well, I performed limited FPS testing using SharpCap and my ASI 174mm, which is what I use for solar imaging. I need high frame rates and wanted to know what I should expect out of these systems. For read and write drive speed testing, I used CrystalDiskMark software, which is a common and free benchmarking tool. When testing, CrystalDiskMark has both a default mode and an NVMe mode, so be sure to test any internal NVMe drives using that mode for accurate results. I ended up using a default profile for testing and a single 1 GB transfer test on each drive. Before we look at the results, the default profile includes multiple tests, but I want to make sure you understand each test. What do these test profiles mean? SEQ is sequential and R&D is random. Sequential is the best case scenario, but random is more real world. Use sequential results to see if your drive is performing up near the published speed of the drive. If not, it may be faulty, or it could be that something else in the system is limiting its performance. 1M, 128K, or 4K. This is how the 1 gig test is written in red. It takes a lot more smaller writes to get to 1 gig, which is more challenging for the system. Alternatively, using bigger chunks of data per read and write to get to the end goal of a 1 gigabit transfer will be easier. Next is queue depth, Q32, Q8, or Q1. If you don't know, SATA has a maximum queue depth available of 32, and NVMe supports a queue depth of 65,000. But don't get too excited. A PC typically only has a queue depth of about 1 to 4, and a server or NAS maybe 32. Finally, the number of threads to be used. T1, 1 thread. This is okay for our purposes. All of this is customizable within the benchmarking tool, but I'll just use the default testing profile here. Finally, I select the drive I want to test and click Start. Okay, there are some of you right now that are thinking, oh, I want to go test my system right now. And you absolutely can. The software link is in the video description. A quick tip though, when downloading this test software, I like to download the zip version and not the installer version. It works fine and doesn't seem to need a full installation process that could possibly add some extra junk to your system. Once you open the zip file, there are 4 executables in there, 2 for Intel and 2 for AMD. Each version has a 32 and 64-bit option. I use the 64-bit Intel version executable for all of my tests here. Results were affected by the drive, processor, and bus speeds only. The OS versions had no impact on my testing. For this reason, I'll only show the drives and system models, but not mention the OS to simplify the charts. All right, ready? Here are the test results. First, we'll look at the MeLE Quieter 2, since it's been around longer and more of you may already be using it. My Quieter 2 model had a 256 gig eMMC drive, a J4125 processor, and 8 gig of LPDDR4 RAM. Your system, if not a MeLE system, may be similar to these specs and should likely be very close to the same results. Remember, the eMMC drive is the onboard storage and where the operating system is installed at the factory. This will become important later. The M2 NVMe is what I added to the system. Micro SD is, well, micro SD. For USB, I used both a small 64 gigabyte USB thumb drive and a higher end 1 terabyte USB 3.2 external NVMe SSD SanDisk. Looking at the results, this area here on the left is the best case performance because it's testing with sequential reads and writes, using bigger chunks It has more queues available, and this here tells me if the drive is meeting my published marketing specifications. You'll never see this speed during normal everyday use, so let's just move on. Next over here, this is the data that's closer to real-world performance. You should assume that you're going to see something between these two columns. This here on the left is a better case bursty real-world read and write, and this on the right is pretty much a worst case scenario. For most of us in this hobby, write speed is going to be more important when we image, but don't completely ignore reading, of course. Think about your imaging camera. In my case, I have two primary cameras, a 2600 mm that writes a 50 meg image and a 1600 mm that writes a 32 meg image. Looking at this data, the eMMC drive in the Quieter 2 is writing between 37 and 48 megabytes per second, and I'm rounding here. It's not horrible, but not great either. But see, with my 2600 mm, we're going to take over a full second per image to write the file. Reads from the drive are in the 20 to 25 megabyte range. So about 2 seconds to read each image from disk. For deep space imaging, this really shouldn't be an issue. My exposure lengths are much longer than that, often 1 to 5+ minutes per exposure, so I have plenty of time to save files while capturing the next image. Now let's look at the NVMe drive I installed. I'm getting just under 900 megabytes per second, best case read numbers. But wait, my NVMe stick is rated for up to 7,000 megabyte per second read speed. Okay, this is where you need to understand the technology. This expensive NVMe stick can use PCIe Express 4.0 lanes. That isn't likely in your mini-PC and isn't possible with the processors we're using. The Quieter 2 uses PCIe 2 because that's what the J4125 processor uses. PCIe 2 throughput is about 500 megabytes per second per PCIe lane. Looking at our numbers here, I'm going to assume that the NVMe I'm using is getting 2 PCIe 2 lanes on the Quieter 2, because that would be around 1 gigabyte per second total throughput. Now, why do I tell you all this? So that you buy the best priced NVMe you can, rather than the most expensive one. Buying a more expensive drive that claims higher throughput may not benefit you in this case. You don't need a $300 2 terabyte drive if using this computer. A $150 2 terabyte model will work just as well. I actually tested this, and I'll put that NVMe stick in the comments as well. As you can see, my NVMe gave me between 75 and 275 megabytes per second as a write speed. This is roughly 2 to 5 times improvement over the internal eMMC drive, and the read speeds are anywhere from 2 to 15 times faster. NVMe is a no-brainer upgrade for these systems. As a matter of fact, I recommend you go out and just buy the 8 gig RAM model with the smallest eMMC drive possible and shift that extra money towards the purchase of an NVMe drive. It's easily the best use of your money when buying or upgrading a mini PC like this. Now we have micro SD testing, stay away from it, end of story. USB, this gets tricky because not all drives are created equal. My thumb drive is at crying slow speeds here, but my external USB SanDisk NVMe SSD more expensive drive is at or better than the onboard eMMC. In my case here, I can choose to write to this external drive instead of the onboard eMMC, and I'll end up with a portable set of files that's easier to take with me right after the session ends at no apparent performance cost. So it may be worth it, although it does consume a USB port, so you need to consider that. Now that we've finished the Quieter 2, let's fly through the Quieter 3 and stick computer results. The biggest win when choosing the Quieter 3 over the Quieter 2 system is the use of their N5105 Intel processor that happens to use PCIe 3 lanes instead of PCIe 2 lanes that we get with the Quieter 2. This means even better NVMe performance. About double the write speed is on the Quieter 2 system. If you're using a bigger sensor or full frame camera, you want to consider the Quieter 3 over the Quieter 2 for this reason alone. On the stick computer, you get what you pay for, and this doesn't support NVMe expansion either. But even in this case, I'm finding that a higher end USB external drive is outperforming the eMMC. So it's not often people tell you to use an external drive over an internal one, but this is one of those cases. And one more item. I mentioned I tested frames per second on both the Quieter 2 and Quieter 3 systems, since that's what I use for solar and wanted to understand how it would work. Before anyone asks, I did not adjust any SharpCap memory settings for these tests since I wanted it to be a comparative test for anyone out there that did their own testing. In my case, I got 90 frames per second for Mono 8 and 66 frames per second on Mono 16, imaging on both systems when viewing real-time data. As a capture test, I did 2 tests per system, where I captured 500 frames and tested writing to both the eMMC and the installed NVMe drive. While I only ever dropped maybe a maximum of 1 to 2 frames per test, regardless of the drive used, the NVMe drive never buffered any frame writes, but the eMMC drive buffered about 100 frames by the end of the test. Now this ends up being about 20% of the 500 frames I gathered, and I can only imagine that the number would increase if you capture more than 500 frames at a time, once the system gets backed up writing files to disk. The overall FPS test results surprised me, since I'd been using a Kingdell i5 based system for solar, and I was only getting about 35 frames per second on a good day. So go figure. A better processor, but I ended up with slower FPS because of the onboard disk. So where does one go from here? Well, a couple takeaways. Don't ever use micro SD slots or cheap USB drives for astrophotography. Also, if you're looking to upgrade or purchase a new Quieter 2, or maybe your Quieter 2 seems slow now or isn't performing quite right, it could be that eMMC drive. Try adding a 1 terabyte NVMe for less than $100 and get an immediate boost to your performance. Or maybe go ahead and get a 2 terabyte NVMe for a bit more money and give yourself more room for those extra large planetary video files. Is your buddy swapping out his Quieter 2 for something else? Take it. Put an NVMe in it and it'll be like new again and better than it ever was. The next question I'll definitely get from people out there is, can I do this? Can I add an NVMe drive? I'm not a computer person. And the answer is yes. A total of 5 Phillips head screws. That's about it for the install. I'll walk you through it in less than 30 seconds. Same process for both the Quieter 2 and Quieter 3. Other computers supporting NVMe should be very similar. Ready? Disconnect everything. Turn it over. Remove the 4 Phillips head screws and take the back plate off. Remove the internal NVMe mounting screw from here. Slide in the NVMe drive and replace the mounting screw. Okay, now add the silicon thermal pad on top of the NVMe, close up the case, tighten up the 4 remaining screws, and you're done. That's it. Wondering about that silicon thermal pad? This is important because it's how the NVMe is both protected from the back cover and how it cools through heat dissipation via the case. This was shipped to you with your computer and does not come with the NVMe drive. You can buy a couple of these separately if needed. A bundle of maybe 3 pads should be less than $10, and at that price they're ripping you off. But since you threw it away, you probably don't have a choice. Amazon link in the description. Okay, perfect. The NVMe is installed now and you're ready to go, right? Is it ever that easy? You said you do astrophotography, right? After installing the new NVMe drive, you need to make a decision, and you have 3 choices that I can think of. Option 1 we'll call the easy option. Keep it simple. Boot Windows, go into the built-in disk management system tool, locate the new drive and format it. It's now ready to use, and you can tell Nina and SharpCap or whatever else you're using to start saving files here right away. Option 2 is the medium difficulty option. Boot to Windows and buy software like AOMI Backupper and use it to clone your eMMC system drive to the new NVMe drive. Once it's done, boot into the BIOS by hammering on F7 at boot up and change the boot order to use the NVMe drive instead of the eMMC drive. Once you've confirmed through 2 or 3 reboots that your C drive is always the NVMe and not the old eMMC, you can format the old drive and use it as extra storage. So why would I recommend that you clone the C drive over to the new NVMe drive? Well, there's a couple reasons. All of your apps and OS will benefit from the faster drive access and seek time capability of the new NVMe. Everything will be faster. Also, because the NVMe is now the system drive, your page file and swap file access will be faster as well. And since most of our MiniPC systems are limited to 8 gig of RAM and you may only have 4 gig, you'll see a big benefit sooner than later. The version of AOMI Backupper that supports system drive cloning is about $50 per computer and supports both Windows 10 and Windows 11. I use this on my Quieter 2 without issue. I get no money for recommending this, but it just works great. However, there is an option 3. So finally, the slightly harder option 3. After installing the NVMe, install a new copy of Windows 11 directly to the NVMe, then wipe out the eMMC drive, just like I did with option 2. Now this option is a fresh installation of the Windows operating system and would require you to reinstall all your applications, unlike option 2 that preserved your apps, accounts, and settings. Option 2 costs you about $50, whereas this option 3 is free. Your call. So how is option 3 free since I need a copy of Windows 11? Well, MeLE has bundled the Windows 11 OS installer and appropriate drivers for us. You just need to know where to get them and how to do it. You also need a small USB thumb drive that you probably have laying around. 16 gig is big enough to handle the job. The next video in this series that I'll publish will take you through the process of reinstalling Windows 11 on an NVMe on the MeLE Quieter 3 with the files from MeLE support. I'll get you there, don't worry, or at least don't worry too much. Okay, that was entirely too much talking from me to you today. It's your turn now. You have something to say? Put it in the comments. Send me an email, an Instagram message, or get me on Discord, wherever. Go order that NVMe drive for your new or old mini-PC. You can thank me later. Consider using my affiliate links on the way to a purchase. It'll allow me to do more hardware-based videos in the future. Also, be on the lookout for my mini-PC install and configuration video coming very soon. I hope to pick up the pace of video production as soon as the clouds part. I have too many half-completed videos to mention. Of course, thanks for spending all this time with me today. Thanks for watching this video. And as always, clear skies, because someone should have clear skies.